Hey everyone, I'm your host, Robbie Strazynski, and thanks so much for joining us on episode number 28 of Cards Chat, the friendliest poker podcast in town. On this episode, we have the pleasure of welcoming David Lappin, the professional poker player affectionately known as everyone's favorite Irish variant. This fine gentleman really is the pot of gold at the end of the proverbial rainbow. David is a longtime ambassador for Unibet Poker and the host of the award-winning Chip Race and Lockdown podcasts, along with Dara O'Kearney. Today, beyond the first-class content he consistently puts out, we'll be discussing David's career in poker and life away from the game, getting to know him a little bit better beyond the felt over the next hour. So, David, welcome to Cards Chat. Nice to see you again.
Cheers, Robbie. I fixed myself a triple espresso, so I'm super high energy for this. Also want to say, I was pretty confident, maybe 80% confident you were setting up a Dick Napkin joke there at the start, but you went with some pot of gold at the end of the rainbow guff instead.
I think the Irish variant works pretty nicely, so...
Absolutely.
We'll try to
make
that.
And you told me off camera, like you introduced this as the friendliest show, and I appreciate that. We have been talking about all the controversial things just before you hit the magic red button there. So we've got them out of my system. I'm going to be really, really nice and positive, and I'm not going to call anyone out. It's going to be lovely.
Brilliant. It sounds good. Let's hope that sticks. It is verbal, so it is binding, David. Of course, plenty of people in our Cards Chat community already know who you are. After all, they did request you as an interviewee for this podcast, but
in 28th position, in fairness, like not in the top 10, not even in the top 20. Episode 28, that's where you were on the list, Dave. Actually, in fairness, you were probably a bit lower because you called me at quite short notice today. I'm going to guess I was actually a little further down and I got bumped.
We reserved, what was it? Is there a Fifth Amendment on the trial? We'll plead the Fifth. For those who don't know who you are, though, who was like, oh, David Lappin, who's this guy? Give us the 60-second elevator pitch summary beyond what I've already mentioned in the introduction.
Troublemaker, ambassador. So Dara O'Kearney described me as maybe one of the only ambassadors who is able to get away with firing as many shots as I do these days because it's sort of pre-packaged into what you're getting.
Yeah.
So maybe I'm the kind of saltiest of the ambassadors out there, but I do like to call it a spade, as they say. And yeah, I've been playing poker for 14 and a half years, quite a while, seen quite a few paradigm shifts over that time. Been a profitable player all that time, proud to say. Admittedly, bumps in the road, as any professional will attest, but it's been pretty plain sailing viewed from a macro level. I have been an ambassador for Unibet for 4 years. I'm just signed my contract for a 5th year, actually, just a couple of weeks ago.
Congratulations.
So delighted to be representing them for another year. And with that comes the Chip Race, which is my podcast you mentioned there at the top. We'll be coming back to I Know and the Lock-In. They're sort of the big products, content creation products that myself and Dara put out these days. So yeah, looking forward to chatting to you about it all.
Sure. And accent notwithstanding, you're actually not in Ireland. You're not in the Emerald Isle. You're on a different island in Malta, right?
Yes, I'm on a little Mediterranean archipelago here in Malta, the major island. We have a few islands here, but I live on the main one in a little town called St. Julian's. I think it's technically a city because it's got a really big cathedral or church in it, but basically think of the entirety of Malta as about the size of a small city, and every little place in Malta is a suburb, really.
Right, and I've been there. I mean, if there's traffic, it's a city. So I think it certainly qualifies.
Yeah, that's true.
So, I mean, you are on an island. I mean, everyone everywhere in the entire world has experienced this pandemic in different ways. I imagine being on a small island, perhaps you've fared better than most. Can you tell us what the last year's been like there?
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head. We've been really lucky in the overall picture of things. We did a lockdown this time last year, much like everywhere in Europe. I think it lasted about 8 weeks. That was very strict, of course. That was sort of just going out for your groceries and maybe having a little walk where you stayed very far away from everyone else. But then we came out of that lockdown, I want to say late April, early May. And life sort of went back to semi-normality, and by that I mean they quite early on did a mask mandate, so everyone had to wear masks in all public places. I guess there's a natural advantage with the temperature being warmer here. You've also got the closure of pubs and nightclubs, but they kept the restaurants and the cafes open. Okay. Again, strong emphasis on social distancing, sanitation, and everything else, as you can imagine once you do that. But the very fact that you can go to a restaurant or go to a coffee shop makes a huge difference in quality of life. And the fact that Malta and the weather allows you to be outdoors so much, and so much of the premises of these places have a little outside area, you can almost resemble normal life. So I think we've been very, very fortunate. Caseload was very low last year. This winter has been quite bad relatively for Malta. Again, without doing any lockdowns, there has been an increase in cases recently. Actually, very recently, a little spike. But fingers crossed, the vaccination rollout's actually the best in Europe, even better than the UK. And we'll be hoping to sort of get back to an even greater sense of normality by the summer, once maybe the over 50s are all vaccinated. That's probably a key moment where very few deaths will occur from that point onwards.
Sure, that's really good news. How about the casinos? I know there's quite a few casinos on Malta. Have those been open at all? Are they going to be opening soon?
Yeah, they've actually been all open since, I want to say, July.
Oh, wow.
I have not frequented them at all. I've got to say, I actually was in one of them once when it was closed for just, it was a demonstration of a new casino product. I was invited to, there was like 5 people in the entire place. But I wouldn't and haven't gone into a casino or don't really want to go into those kind of crowded environments. There are some bars, coffee shops and things around the town that are quite busy. I would generally steer clear of those and go to the quieter places.
Right.
But yeah, no, the casinos are happening. And in fact, there is probably around the time you drop this episode, there will be an event. The DSO will be in Portomasso Casino, the one with the big tower that people might know.
Yep.
And that will be, I want to say, maybe a 250 runner event, played 5 max, because that's the maximum amount of people you're allowed to have on a table in the casinos.
Interesting. I've been to Portomasso, definitely a really beautiful location. It's nice to hear that there is, rumblings of some poker. They got the cash games going. So that's good. I mean, the reason I asked you about going to casinos, I mean, of course, you were, beyond playing online, of course, you were a traveling live poker pro. You did a lot of travel. I've met you in places in Las Vegas and Barcelona and in Malta and in Bucharest. You've been everywhere, David. I mean, that's probably been quite a bit of an adjustment for you. Can you tell us, a little bit about that as far as just, you're professional, you're playing poker, but it's basically all online now.
Absolutely. Well, firstly, thank you very much. The last time we were in Vegas, you gave me the all access behind the scenes pass of all the WSOP stuff going on. You were obviously working on that live stream. So you were very kind, showing me around how it all worked, all the technical stuff. That was fun. You're right. We do stumble across one another pretty regularly, as I'm sure everyone can attest in poker. You just you choose your live events, a lot of crossover with friends of yours. You see people every second or third stop. Some people you see on almost every stop. It's been a huge adjustment from that point of view. I would have played 100 tournaments a year. I would have maybe done about 16 trips a year. Malta is a great poker hub, so there would be 6 or 7 big festivals here as well. So probably all in all, 25 festivals, probably playing live poker every 2 weeks. And it's gone from that to literally zero. I've played online poker throughout the pandemic, but I have not set foot in a casino, with the exception of that one time, as I said, and that wasn't to play. I am looking forward to getting back to it, but I'm probably on the more cautious side. I'm probably on the more nitty side when it comes to this pandemic. I don't have direct access to any elderly people, which is great. But on the flip side of that, my son goes to school and he's in a bubble of 5 kids, and who knows what those 5 kids do when they go home. Maybe they have elderly relatives. So I try to be as safe as possible.
What do you miss the most about playing live?
I definitely miss the camaraderie and the sort of not playing aspect in a way. It is a social sort of part of the whole thing. When you do the traveling circus, as you described it, it can be a really nice break from the monotony of like a month of online grind. You might do your month or 6 weeks, and then you've got a trip to look forward to, and then that trip comes with breakfast in the morning, maybe some dinner breaks where you get to see people, maybe a couple of nights out if you're unlucky in the tournaments, and you can kind of let your hair down. I definitely miss all the people, trying my best to stay in touch with everybody, but I think it's a weird aspect of this, maybe sort of as we go into the second year of this kind of COVID world, you feel like people are dropping off. And I don't know what's going on there. I think there is a general, maybe everyone's sick and tired of it. Everyone's a bit pissed off, frankly. And it's hard to sort of even motivate yourself to get in a better humor and maintain maybe the more casual relationships. Of course, you're going to talk to family and friends, but there's kind of that second level of friendships, those acquaintances that you might see on these kind of situations, unless there's a direct reason to talk to them from work. I'm conscious I've let a few people fall away. I want to get them all back as soon as possible.
Right. Well, I don't take offense, David, and it's fine. I appreciate you answered the phone.
We talk weekly, Robbie. I don't know what you're talking about.
We do. We're actually quite.
We talk more since the pandemic.
I would say so. I agree with that. Well, as far as the live play, one of the questions we love asking here at the CardsChat Podcast: who is the friendliest poker player you've ever sat with at the tables?
Oh, that's a good question. Who's friendly? Do you know what? I actually have to give a weird shout out to somebody I almost never would. Ian Simpson is pound for pound one of the friendliest people you'll ever meet. He's a simple chap, it's got to be said. There's not a huge amount of badness in him. I very rarely have heard him say a bad word about anyone. He just kind of wants to get along and enjoy himself, and he's the consummate ambassador actually at that level. Dara O'Kearney is very good as well. Obviously, the kind of person that you can have a kind of a deep and meaningful chat with, maybe at the table, have a little conversation off to the side. I got to give a shout out to both my fellow Unibet ambassadors. They definitely shore up the area I lack. Maybe I'll certainly have a chat with you, but it mightn't be that friendly.
I hear that, and yes, definitely shout out to Ian, your fellow ambassador at Unibet Poker. I mean, of course, at Unibet Poker, it's not just the online site. They have tons of a good dozen, something like a half dozen live tournament series usually throughout the year. But like every operator, they've moved. I love the way you guys put it, from IRL to URL. It's a really cool way of describing it. It's the truth, and that's certainly ongoing for the rest of this year as well. As a player, though, like you said, you're basically only playing online. How has that affected you as far as your play, as far as your strategy? Do you have to mix it up a little bit more? Do you have to play a little bit differently?
You have to play better, to be perfectly honest. I think live poker is so soft generally that you can probably get away with more. You can probably take more passive lines and kind of put yourself in spots where you can use that physical component. You can look at somebody and try and figure out what they have, as opposed to just sort of deconstructing their betting pattern or whatever it might be, or the population tendencies. Obviously online, there's just a much greater level of rigorousness. You just have to have very good fundamentals. You can't get away with playing online poker without at least being really strong fundamentally these days. And then above and beyond that, you've got to also have, maybe that higher capability too. You've got to be able to understand maybe the different ICM pressure points in a tournament. I mostly play tournaments. You've got to understand how to exploit other regulars, which is, again, if you're playing a lot of live poker, you're probably able to gobble up that recreational sort of money in a much greater way online. Certainly the stakes I play, more mid stakes, admittedly, but when you get into those games, you've got to be kind of willing to tussle with some decent players.
For sure. And you said you're doing better, so you certainly have a handle on all those fundamentals. So that's pretty good to hear. Beyond all of the things you mentioned, one of the important things any poker player knows, even newbies, is game selection. It's obviously very important for someone who wants to succeed. You always say if you're the 8th best player in the world, but you're sitting with the 7 best, that's not good game selection. You ain't going to win. How much time and effort do you put into finding good tournaments, good cash games now? And what sort of factors or elements are you sort of on the lookout for that you say, okay, this is where I'm going to go ahead and pull up a seat, and this is where I'm going to register?
That's a great question. And I guess it's so inbuilt into my whole philosophy in poker that maybe I take it for granted at times. But yeah, I am a consummate game selector. The fact that I'm a Unibet ambassador sort of makes one aspect of this easy, because the games on Unibet are soft. There's a lot of value in those games. They're hoodless games. They're essentially anonymous games. People can choose their avatar and their alias, and they can change it as often as they want, pretty much. So you can effectively play without anyone having any knowledge of who you are, which sort of means you're going to end up falling into population tendencies. You're not going to have those specific notes about how to beat up a specific villain you come across. It's going to be much more a generalized theory. But those games are really good. And obviously being an ambassador for the site, the first thing I do when I load up a nighttime session is just find all the kind of $25 plus games on Unibet. There's a decent range between $25 and $100 every night. There's a decent number of good rebuys. So even the 25s are really a 75 or 100 average buy-in. And that sort of maybe covers about 40% of my screen. I'm quite a big multi-tabler, so then I kind of look to other sites. I don't mind saying I go to PokerStars. They have a lot of PKOs. I've sort of taken a bit of an interest in PKOs. Dara's obviously the man who wrote the book. I got to read the book before the book even came out. I've been grinding the information and trying to learn as much as I can in that format. So just trying to apply that stuff. As many PKOs as I can find on Stars, on Party, dabbling a little bit with GG these days, although I haven't really put in a big grind there. That looks like it's definitely got some decent options too. I used to be a decent micro gaming grinder back in the day, but now it's much more, they've moved to iPoker. I really don't like that software, so I haven't made that leap yet, but maybe those games are pretty soft too. So yeah, they're probably around the stake level I play. If you want to put a nighttime schedule together, they're pretty good. Obviously mix in a bit of 888, although I haven't done that recently, but I did before Christmas. I'm always just sort of chasing the best, maybe 50 to 100 quid games that I can find. I want to fill my screen, pack it up there. As I said, 40% of it will be Unibet. Invariably, they're the ones you make final tables on because they're slightly smaller field sizes. So usually I'll have something to brag about at the end of the night. You'll see me brag away on Twitter or whatever if I do happen to make a final table. And yeah, that's kind of the way it is these days. But as I said, it's so baked into my whole philosophy of poker. It was right there from the very beginning. When I was a new player, when I was trying to essentially make it, cut my teeth as a 45-man grinder, average buy-in of like $20, I was $2,000 in the bank account. Like if I had a bad month, that was me busto. So it taught me to be really, really strict on that stuff and have those sort of, game selection fundamentals that I suppose have never really gone away.
I think it's always so fascinating, for recreational players such as myself to hear what exactly goes through a pro's mind as far as game selection. There's a lot we could learn from that sort of a thing. And also just for those who are not familiar with the abbreviations, HUDs, heads-up displays, ICM, independent chip model, and PKO are the progressive knockouts. So definitely you've got a lot on your plate, and it's really cool to hear about that, David. I do believe that you have a little bit of an announcement for us as far as something that Unibet Poker is going to be running pretty soon.
Yeah, so I knew I was going to be on your show today, Robbie. I had a word with the fabulous Kat Arnsby and Christopher Burkfell. They are the marketing person and the head of poker in Unibet. And a little bit racist, I thought of them, to be honest. They told me about a Paddy's Day promotion, which I suppose maybe they just made that up just for me. I'm not sure, but they're doing some cash game promotion around Patrick's Day, where they're giving away about $5,000 on the day, I think, in various mission forms. There's a very gamified cash game loyalty scheme with Unibet, and it's built into the missions there. Obviously, as well, come to the end of this month, the Unibet Online series is on right now. It will be culminating with the Unibet Open on the 19th, 20th, 21st, 22nd of this month. And that will be really big. That's a 1K buy-in online tournament that's particularly soft. Obviously, the 1K circuit online is particularly tough. Right. And I would usually light into those kind of games. I would think of them as more like the standard of a 5K live tournament, to be perfectly honest. Wow. But not so with Unibet. The 1K is much more like £100 buy-in, to be honest. They've been satelliting people into this thing for months and months, and you're going to have a lot of satellite qualifiers, a lot of recreationals in there. Again, the HUDless feature to Unibet means that you don't really feel like anyone's like completely, zoning in on your weaknesses or anything. So for any recreational players out there who fancy a satellite into something like that, if you do get into the main tournament itself, you won't be that big a dog. In fact, you might even be break even with the field as a recreational, let alone, a low stakes winner. So that they're really, really good tournaments, and I'm looking forward to that. Actually, very lucky got to play that in December and come fourth
Nice.
And my very good friend, Porrick O'Neill, completed that wild back-to-back where he won it, and he had won the previous Unibet Open as well. So sort of mind-blowing achievement there. There are a couple of two-time Unibet Open winners, but they did it on the live felt, and they didn't do it back-to-back like Porrick.
Excellent. I mean, you did mention this cash game promotion, and you mentioned before also you're mostly a tournament player. Why? Well, what's a difference to you as far as a professional? You study hard. You've been doing this, as you said, for 14 years. Why did you select tournaments and choose those and prefer those over cash games?
Great question. And I don't really have a great answer other than I probably had my early positive experiences in tournaments. And I think that probably made me feel like, oh, these are kind of nicer. I enjoy these. I suppose the story of the beginning, middle, and end phase keeps you interested, or at least it did keep me interested then. And for that reason, they became more my speciality. I guess as well, when I got good at poker for the first time, say like a year in, and I'd finally thought, oh, I'm actually good at this game now, rather than someone who was just kind of trying and reading all the books and doing my best. One of the things I realized I was very good at was the short stack fundamentals. So, playing 10 bigs, playing 15 bigs, playing 20 bigs, anything in that zone and in between as well. I realized I was playing pretty damn well. And if you think about it, what tournament do you ever play where you don't end up in that zone for at least a while? Sometimes you grind the whole tournament in that zone. So being good at that meant that I generally was, delivering good results. And I guess that's why I splash around in the cash games once in a while. But no, it's definitely not my forte. And I would be value in any game higher than a 2-5 live, I assume, unless it was a particularly soft lineup. But
let me take a note. Hold on. David is a dog. Yeah. Okay, good. We'll make sure we'll place in 2-5 next time we're in Las Vegas, David.
But it's funny to say that because I wouldn't think twice about a main event buy-in, an EPT buy-in. I played lots of those. $5,000, probably not going to get your money back, 4 times out of 5 or whatever it is, sure. 5 times out of 6 maybe. So psychologically knowing that money's gone before you play and then hopefully cashing, having a few results is one thing. But then if I was to sit down with $3,000 in a cash game, I think I'd already be like, oh, this is quite a lot of money sitting in front of me on the table.
Right.
So it is it's a weird way in which I think two very different poker mindsets maybe find the other one hard to comprehend fully.
For sure. Well, very well put. And I think it's important. It is the same game after all, but there's just, a litany of differences. Well, David, of course, in poker, we're not supposed to be results oriented, but someone who is high profile like yourself, we're compelled to look at how you've done. So it is Hendon mob time, Mr. Lapin. Before we get into any specifics, to what degree do those numbers matter to you? Do you want to be top of the list, king of the leaderboard, most cashes, best, Irish player? Is that an important thing for you?
Yes and no. When I was a full-time grinder, so before I was an ambassador and I kind of split my time between content creation and playing and all of that good stuff, yeah, I was very focused on being the best player that I could be. And I wanted to, climb the Pocket Fives Irish rankings, for example, or I wanted to compete for the UK IPT leaderboard back in the day when Dara O'Kearney, Dara Davey, and myself really went for both online and live leaderboards. And I think I ended up second in one and third in the other. O'Kearney, of course, won the satellite one, and Dara Davey actually won the live one. So I was sort of the bridesmaid in both cases. But yeah, I was really going for that. I don't really think too much about I think I'm the second most cashed Irish person to Dara. But that's just fucking weird. I think I'm the 40th most amount of money, and really the money is the only thing that does matter. So right. That's just more of a product of the fact that I play a lot of 500 to 1K live tournaments, and I'm on the circuit, 20 trips a year or whatever right. I said it was. So that's more just what happens when you do that for a decent number of years. I wouldn't put too much stock in that. These days, it's a bit trickier because I know I can't really climb any of those rankings. For a start, Unibet aren't tracked properly because of the anonymous nature. So
right.
At least 40% of my volume doesn't even get put on a leaderboard or tracking system like Pocket Fives or whatever it is.
Right. And I'll just interrupt you for 1 second because, much of our audience is American. You're not necessarily aware that it's a Europe. What's it? GLDR? What's it called?
GDPR.
GDPR. It's some sort of, why don't you go ahead and explain it for those who aren't familiar, because I'm, American too, so I don't remember. It's something to do with anonymity and not, privacy laws, something like that.
Yeah, it's essentially a kind of the entitlement that you have to online anonymity, and they're much more strictly enforced here in Europe. In fact, there was a big law, I want to say like 4 years ago passed, which sort of made it so that people couldn't share details. So if you give your details to a site, let's use the example of poker now, they can't pass that on to a third party. They can't do anything with that. So, it's good. It's good for your own protection, but it does create some small complexities or trickiness when you're trying to do certain stuff. One being, obviously anonymous poker. Well, if your players are all going to be anonymous, we can't then send on your results to Sharkscope or to OPR or one of those tracking things that would just be completely wrong. So we don't, and hence, a good chunk of my volume these days doesn't even get tracked. So I'm never even going to be in the picture on that stuff. So I suppose what I do to soothe the beast, because I still have that competitive drive, is I target our leaderboard. So Unibet have an online series. The one I mentioned is going on right now. We run that 4 times a year, and there's always a leaderboard attached. At least 2 out of those 4 times, I'll go for it. It means playing like 25 days in a row. To be honest, as a family man, that's pretty tough. Yep. Sharon has to take a hit. I become kind of antisocial. There's no fun. But as I said, it kind of gives me something to compete for. And I've done quite well. I've won that leaderboard 4 times, or I've won leaderboards 4 times, not necessarily the big one all 4 times, but one of the leaderboards on 4 occasions. And I'm going for it again in this one. So that's good fun, and that kind of scratches the itch of wanting to kind of compete and see if I can still tussle. But then in the end of the day, that's a sample size of like 100 tournaments. So while that's not completely insignificant, bigger picture, it kind of is.
I understand. I hear you. Well, I did look at those results. I did say I looked at the Hand in Mod page, and I noticed something is that all of your live caches, the ones that I see there that are recorded, they come in 3- and 4-figure buy-in events. So my first question is, how many 10K and up events have you played? And secondly, is it an aspiration of yours to move up to those 5-figure buy-ins? Or are you just, I'm happy, I'm doing okay, I'm cashing a lot and, making money consistently. Maybe I don't need to play for the nosebleed stakes.
Tricky. I've never played a 5-figure tournament that wasn't the main. And the main is a different animal because
and the WSOP, right?
Yes, exactly. The WSOP main event is just a kind of a special thing. It's a 10K tournament. That's the standard of a 500 quid tournament.
Right.
And while you will find the best players in the world in it, the standard is across the board. So that's kind of the one you can't miss.
Right.
So in fact, I've never played a 5-figure tournament. If you remove that, EPTs, I think maybe I've played 10. They were 5Ks. That's probably as tough a field as I've ever put myself in. And at the time, I did feel like I could compete reasonably well. That was probably a few years ago now, I will admit. These days, I wouldn't feel like, say, the 5K and up circuit would be something I would be confident I would be anything better than break even in. And even at that, I would be game selecting quite strictly, I assume. So it just doesn't make sense. When I'm on the live circuit these days, the 1K circuit with the 2K high roller, the 500 side event is kind of perfect. And I just, do all of that stuff. And then I add in the Vegas where I'll take the kind of bigger shots.
Sure.
Of course, if I was to have a few big results, if I was to maybe get into the lab a bit more, really sharpen up my game, maybe at some point in the future, maybe when it's not all about family life as well, because that's a big focus too these days. I have a 4-year-old son. When that kind of maybe tempers down a bit, perhaps I'll re-engage with trying to become as good as I can possibly be, at which point maybe if I had the money, maybe, but to be honest, the swings in those games are pretty ridiculous, and I think you pretty much need $1 million bankroll to even consider start playing a 10K circuit. So
sure. Well, bankroll management is, of course, so very important. How many stories have we heard of people who have had one huge score and then all of a sudden, within a year, it's gone because they just went ahead, and played for stakes that were too high. So, very conscientious decision making of you. One other thing I noticed on your Hand in Mod profile, of course, I said you've been going around traveling the circuit. You've got 23 flags. So you've cashed in 23 different countries or, different locations, jurisdictions around the world. Would you say, from your experience, having played in so many places, cities, countries, are there places where the players are specifically more skilled, less skilled, or is it really just a function of the stakes that you play for?
I think it's mostly a function of the stakes. I think it's definitely the case that, I hate to say it, America these days is a little softer. It was a little tougher, but it's very fair to kind of explain why that is. You know, Dara O'Kearney has a great phrase for this. He says they've been on a different evolutionary track ever since Black Friday, and that's very much true. Online poker is in hyperspeed. Live poker is at a snail's pace. If you're only improving at a snail's pace and getting that number of hands in, it's more likely that you're not going to really keep up with the modern paradigm. So admittedly, I only go over to Vegas maybe once or twice a year. World Series is certainly one of those times. That's a particularly soft festival. It feels like the Americans are a little bit more value. Sorry, guys. It used to be the case. It used to be the other way around. I remember I lived in America in 2008, 9, 10, and I would have said it was actually much tougher back then for sure. So there's no shame in it. But yeah, I do feel like that might be the case. I would feel like maybe in Europe, if you go to the more Latino countries or Latin countries, France, Spain, Italy, I do feel like there's a kind of a tendency to be overly aggressive. And if you can adjust your game appropriately, maybe play a slightly more stationy game, slightly more trappy game, I think that's an adjustment you can make and do extra well there. Obviously the Irish are just the best. You know, that's the toughest place to make money. Irish people, you know, they don't open their wallets easily, and you're not going to get any of the cash out of them. They're all too good. Have to say that, don't I?
The best and the most humble, I must say. Well, I did say, David, we're not going to be results oriented. So let's touch a little bit on the process. Like all professional poker players, you, of course, do spend some time, not all your time, you got a lot of, you know, balls that you're juggling, but some time in the lab studying. Are there any specific areas of study that you have been focusing on recently or in general that you're always trying to hone your skills?
Well, I have to say, shout out to Patrick Leonard here. I have managed to get my hands on pads. And while I'm only at the beginning of that, I'm finding that absolutely phenomenal. So credit to him for creating that piece of content. I also do like to play the DTO app. I was one of the first people to probably download the thing when it first came out. I've been a friend of Dominic's for a long time. So as soon as I saw that he was putting his name on, not just his name actually, but all his charts, all his information, all his gold, he was going to share some of that amazingly valuable stuff. I was an early adapter, and I've been incorporating DTO training pretty much since it became a thing. Right. And big shout out to that piece of kit as well. They've just released their pre-flop charts now too, which, while I probably have my own sort of stuff on that, again, great value. In fairness, he's putting it out and undercutting the market on that stuff too. So I would recommend those two pieces of kit. They're really good. I have a Run It Once subscription, which I use a little bit too. Daniel DeVoris videos are brilliant. Greenwood videos are brilliant. So I'm kind of getting my coaching that way. And then, of course, well, I'm very fortunate. Not everybody can be lucky enough to say this, but I've got Dara O'Kearney on the back phone. I've got him on speed dial. So if I need a hand run through, or I need a bit of on the spot advice of like, what would you have done here? I'm in a really nice circle of friends, a lot of Irish professionals. We talk hands through, and, you know, Dara obviously is at the tippy top of that. You know, usually will go away and give me a solver output on the hand the next day if it's a hand I'm really thinking about, or maybe one that's puzzling him too. And yeah, we talk a lot of, you know, strategy. Obviously, we have a lot of strategy segments for the chip race, sure. And we like to prep them as well as we can too. So we're always talking about, you know, training, coaching type stuff.
Right. Well, it's definitely good to keep those gears well oiled. And I'm sure that's something that, you know, many of our listeners, many people watching this video want to do as well. For those who are a little bit more at the beginning of their poker path, you know, they're not necessarily at the pads on pad stage or the DTO app from Dominic Nietzsche. Are there any particular resources you may wish to recommend to them? Maybe they don't necessarily have poker friends with whom to consult just yet.
If you really do want to get a sort of an early crash course, and you have a handle on the basic stuff. One thing that is great, because it sort of soothes the soul, is if you can get into a tournament cheaper, if you can satellite into something. So having some satellite weapons early on will actually stand to you really well, because it'll get you into some games feeling a little bit more comfortable because you've ponied up less money. And on that, obviously, I have to give a shout out to Dara O'Kearney and Barry Carter and their fantastic book on satellite strategy, which I don't think anyone will ever write anything even close to. I think they sort of wrote the Bible. I think anything that follows will be, maybe they'll find a little spot here or there that Dara and Barry miss, but I really can't see it. It's just so comprehensive. So I think that's a really useful weapon. But then I suppose that does still already suggest that you have some knowledge. Maybe you go back to some old books. Maybe you go back to your Harrington on Hold'ems and just try and, figure out range. In fairness, Upswing have a very good $7 course. I believe it's just $7, which sort of gets you to grips with, C betting and ranging and isolating limpers and that kind of stuff. And I believe that's very good, although I will admit I've never watched it, but I've heard good things.
Interesting. I mean, that actually does dovetail quite nicely into my next question. You mentioned Upswing. I noticed that you started writing for them as well, the Upswing Poker blog, I guess, as well as another site, Vegas Slots Online, plus.com. And plus, every so often, of course, you've been writing a strategy column at Poker News. How did all of these writing initiatives come about, and what do you enjoy about each of them?
Yeah, they all kind of came to me, to be honest. Obviously,
Really?
I've always written a blog, and I've always, I take copious notes. Even before this interview, Robbie, I could show you here on my phone. I've got notes just in case I need to fall back on something or remind myself of something.
Wow.
So I've always been somebody who's writing, opinion pieces in the form of blogs for poker. I've been writing strategy segments for the show, which obviously end up sort of structuring those pieces. Dara obviously does all the heavy lifting there with the solver and the analysis, but I'm sort of piecing maybe the structure or shape of it together for us there, and as such have a good handle on that material too. Basically, the strategy pieces for Poker News were a legacy of our time pitching those pieces to Martin Harris, who used to write for Poker News, and he used to write those for us. And then when he left, we were in danger of losing that sort of being in the shop window of Poker News, which is a great place to get your information out. Sure. And I spoke to Will Shillabier, who obviously is the editor-in-chief there, and he said that if I wrote them myself, which to be honest isn't a big deal because they're not very long articles and it's on stuff I've already written notes on, then they can present them that way and we can effectively get a little advertisement for the chip races strategy videos. So that's where that came from. I did some commentary for Upswing during the Polk Dean Eggs Challenge either side of Christmas. And in doing so, became very good pals with Mike Brady, who's a lovely, lovely man, one of the nicest people I've ever come across in poker. And Mike suggested to me, he said, would I consider writing longer strategy articles based on our chip race videos, go back into the archive and kind of reorder them and sort of put them out that way via their site. I guess in the absence of Doug creating content with Thomas Keeling, they maybe have a slight dearth of content that can put out the Upswing brand, and they're looking for a few people who could do something similar. Look, none of us are Doug Polk, none of us have that reach, but maybe do something akin to the way he put out videos. So that's sort of what I've been doing for them. That's been really nice. I'm basically putting out a piece every 2 weeks with those guys, and they're lovely to work with. As I said, Mike Brady's just the nuts. He makes everything so easy. And then I was approached by Vegas Slots Online, actually a company called Blexer, who I think sort of give their articles to different companies or affiliate sites that they work with. So I wasn't exactly sure of who I was writing for, to be honest, but I knew I was essentially writing Poker News articles that had a slight op-ed quality. So they were previously writing news pieces. They were keen to, I don't want to make it seem like anyone who can, because I don't even know the writers who came before me, but I guess what they were doing before was a little less in the industry and a little less opinionated. And they wanted to bring somebody in who could, with some amount of authority, hopefully have a little bit, talk or comment on these types of things. They had seen the Lock-In show and thought, oh, you cover like 4 news things in that hour-long show with the guest. Is there any way you could kind of expand on maybe 2 or 3 of those things per week and put them out as news content for us? And that's a delicate one for me. I'm going to be honest, because I don't really want to write poker news, if I'm honest. Like, I don't really want it to be like, oh, this happened or so-and-so won something. And there may be times where I might have to do a kind of a piece of that nature, but I'm much more interested in doing the more op-ed kind of stuff. And I'm hoping they'll go in that direction with me. If they will, then I'll probably continue to write for them
Nice.
Because I do like to kind of get my voice out there in some form. And I guess if I wasn't doing it and being paid to do it by them, I'd be doing it in a blog. So
I suppose you and I are birds of a feather in that way. Well, we talked about a lot about your poker play. We talked a lot about your content creation. Obviously, juggling both is a challenge for anyone. But as someone who's clearly involved, very heavily in both, how do you decide what to give priority to on any given day? And maybe do you have like a weekly schedule, or it's just, take it one day at a time?
The pandemic has been good for this, weirdly, because you're always at home. So you're in a position to really schedule out your life months ahead with a pretty strong degree of confidence that nothing will change, unfortunately. Sure. So creating content was much tougher when I was traveling every month, essentially, with Dara. We would batch stuff. We would even create content on the road together if we were at the same trip. And yeah, it was a much more race to the finish line most of the time. When I would get back to base camp here in Malta, I might have like a show going out this week and next week and the week after, because we were doing it in kind of a month on, a month off back then. And that would be a genuine scramble to the finishing line, trying to book guests, make sure we get them in time, make sure I can get the edit done in time. And since pandemic, it's just like, oh, I can box in those interviews and we can do it at a much kind of slower pace. And everyone's in the same position. Everyone's sitting at their computer at home, happy to have the chat with you. And previously they were busy, and now they're like, oh, I get to talk to somebody in the real world. Brilliant. Okay. Yeah, I can book me in for Friday. That's cool.
Confirmed.
Yeah. So I think with that in mind, it's been so much easier. We obviously added on the show. We're actually coming up to our first year anniversary of the lock-in. We premiered it on April 1st, April Fool's Day last year. As a sort of an attempt to, well, we didn't really know what we were going to do. We knew we wanted to put out some extra content. We knew we wouldn't be providing value to Unibet at the live events, and we didn't want to leave them short of content, and we kind of wanted to maybe do something a little bit extra. We were fumbling around in the dark at the beginning of what that show would be. I think it's obvious when you watch the first maybe 3 or 4 episodes, we're not quite sure what kind of show we're making. Right. We're sort of like chatting to the guests, we're figuring it out. But I think around the 5th or 6th episode, we realized that the thing that resonated more was talking about topics in poker, maybe some subjects specific to the guests, but also general topics, and getting them to weigh in just as much as we would. And that sort of worked. So since then, we've been basically making the show in a similar fashion. We're coming up on our 23rd, 24th show now.
Nice.
And yeah, basically putting out 2 of those every month. And again, we're just able to pace it. I think if we go back to the live world, something will have to give. We probably won't be able to produce quite so much stuff, or certainly not in the consistent way. We switched the chip race to a fortnightly show because we just thought, oh, we can just do one every 2 weeks. There won't ever be a spot where we're not around. So that's good as well. But, you mentioned what's kind of a priority. And, you mentioned my writing stuff, lock-in, chip race. Obviously, family is the main priority. But when it comes to work stuff, I guess it's like a mixture between playing, because I want to kind of keep Sundays definitely free for playing, and then maybe another 2 nights a week. That's pretty much what I do these days. And then the chip race. The chip race is still my baby, to be honest. I still just have so much affection for that show. I think we really did something great with that show, where we put together a genuine variety package every week. Yep. We try and, talk to loads of different people in the industry. We try and polish those interviews up so that it's a really tight show. There's no flab in there. And I still think that will be a hard one to beat for me, just because I kind of feel like that's the best calling card I have, and most representative of the kind of thing I wanted to maybe create in poker as a piece of content. So yeah, that's, even though I love the lock-in, it's a good show, it's an easier one to make as well. It's a bit like this chat.
Sure.
Whereas the chip race is a real labor of love. There's about 28, 29 hours go into the making of every show.
Wow.
By somebody. So, some of those are Dara's hours. Good, a lot of them are mine. Some of them are Sharon's, my girlfriend, who actually does all our graphic work. And we're just, we're about 15 minutes as Ian Simpson's.
Yeah. It certainly takes a village. When it's not, it didn't just win an award for being there. And let's pick one that starts with the letter C. So it's a great podcast. And that actually is the last couple questions that I have for you. We mentioned it is the GPI award-winning chip race. You host it with Dara O'Kearney. And I just want to point out as well, he was our guest for episode number 19 here on the Cards Chat podcast. Always a good shout out to all of our previous episodes. If you're just tuning in for the first time to this one, episode number 28, we've got a nice catalog going back a few months. Go ahead and feel free to listen to those. You guys...
Sorry, just to clarify there, but sorry to interrupt. So sure. Dara is 9 people more popular than I am. That's basically what that means. And Fintan Hand is just 1 person more popular, because I saw he was on last week.
Yes.
So, good representation by the Irish there. Coming back to what I said about the Irish kicking ass in poker, there's 3 of us in the first 28.
You guys certainly pack a punch. And I believe Lynn Gilmartin was also, I think she was episode number 7 or 8, and she was born in Ireland. So that's got to count as well, right?
And we're cousins. Lynn and I are cousins.
Sure. Yeah, right.
No, we actually are cousins. He's Lynn Gilmartin. I'm David Kilmartin Lappin. Gilmartin is the Irish of Kilmartin. And I did my due diligence on this before we had her on our show. And it's an absolute coin flip. There's basically a 50-50 chance whether she is related or isn't, because there's only 2 Kilmartin families in Dublin.
Interesting. Okay. So this is your claim to fame, but not necessarily hers.
Well, she's like fucking Nicole Kidman now, doing her movies and shit. So when she becomes really famous, that's going to be more like an 80-20% chance that we're related.
I see. Very nice.
That's true, though. It is a coin flip. It is a coin flip whether we're related.
Well, I do want to just say, though, big shout out to you guys. You have a big milestone coming up, episode number 100. As a poker player, you're trained to look at things logically, objectively. So I have to ask, does this magic number 100 mean something special to you, or it just happens to be the episode after number 99?
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. The whole thing's a con, Robbie. They're just all numbers. However, there's marketing value in it. I was able to go to Unibet and go, 100th episode, guys, 100th episode. Give me loads of money and promotional money, and we'll put a tournament behind us. There's going to be a tournament with extra money given on the Unibet client that week. We're going to be doing massive amounts of giveaways. So that you're right. It is just nonsense numbers, but it gave me the leverage I needed to just go into the Unibet piggy bank and steal as much value for you as I could. So it's useful. It's useful.
Brilliant. Can you give us an inkling? When is this going to premiere? Maybe like who your guests may be, or what sort of segments you might have. A little bit of a leaky Lapin reveal here.
Yeah, I'd be delighted. I think the show's going to go at April 19th.
Okay.
It's going to be featuring. We thought we'd give a few sort of lesser well-known people a go for this one, just because we thought, well, we'll get the extra attention for the 100th show. So we don't really need to go with star power. We'll try and throw these lads a bone. Some lad called Douglas Polk, and a guy called Jason Kuon. I think that's how it would be spelt pronounced in the Irish.
Sure.
Jason Kuhn. And actually, we do have a great Irish guest, Annette O'Carroll, who's one of my favorite people in poker. Mm-hmm. She's going to be on the show, reminding everybody where we came from and our roots.
Brilliant.
And then, there's going to be so many voices on this show, because we actually have a segment in mind where we're going to be bringing 10 or 12 people on to ask us questions and talk about poker. So in reality, the guest list is 15 people.
Wow.
It's going to be great, Robbie. You might even be there. You might even be invited.
This is news. I like it. Very good. You guys heard it first here on Cards Chat. And that's the end of my questions. But of course, this is now the part of the show where we turn to you guys, the Cards Chat community, to see what questions you wanted to ask our guests. We do have a dedicated thread for it on the Cards Chat forum. So as we announce who our future guests are going to be, that's your opportunity to submit your questions. Our first forum member is Chavis, Chaviiis. Chavis, thank you very much for putting this one forward to David. Can you tell us, David, your opinion about the evolution in poker Where do you think it's going, and what could be the future for online poker?
That's a super question, Chavis. That's actually a better question than any of the questions Robbie asked me for the last hour. So maybe you should be doing his job. Chavis, that's genuinely is a great question. So poker has sort of come out of the Texas road gambling paradigm and gently through maybe the 70s and 80s and 90s moved into the sort of more modern era where I guess players started sharing information, maybe, having conversations more about the hands they were playing. You sort of saw that happen. Doyle even revealed a lot with his book Super System. I guess that sort of started the ball rolling for some book content. You've got Harrington and all that good stuff from back in the day too. So we were sort of in a book learning phase then. I think anyone who took up the game in the 90s or 2000s could lean into that. They could read up, they could get the basics down really quickly, or they could read those kind of books and get a few tips from the top pros of the day. Obviously, we moved from there into the video paradigm, I guess, as soon as technology allowed it. Now you got guys making training videos, you got guys recording their hands. That sort of simplifies the whole process, speeds things up. Obviously, internet poker is blowing up at the time. So you've got everything moving in hyper speed, people playing millions of hands per year instead of a million hands in a career, which is probably what Doyle did. And, that's pushing everything on. Software is creeping in now. You're into the next, maybe paradigm with some software and technology. You've got, a whole resources calculator. You've got these kind of tools which are helping everyone. And I think that's very much been what poker's looked like at the top level for the top online guys and top live guys, really, for the last maybe 7 or 8 years, probably post 2009-10. And then now in the last 3-4 years, you very slowly but very consistently entered the solver paradigm, and I think that's where we're going to be stuck for quite a while. I think you're looking at very much the game changer. The biggest moment maybe for all of poker is now how to get good at poker is actually how to run these solves, input the data correctly, and then absorb and create heuristics from the output, which is really, really important to sharpening up your own mind, understanding bet sizes, understanding frequencies, understanding the board textures at a level never before understood, and only being able to be understood, frankly, now because of the help of these software tools and the power of these computers. These are essentially supercomputers. Now we all have, phones that have more technology than got the first man to the moon. So just imagine what your laptop's capable. Now imagine what a $5,000 computer is capable of doing. And a lot of the top players have these supercomputers. They've got the programs running 24/7, sims, working out ranges, working out the lines, working out the game tree of different tricky hands. And then they're looking at that output. This is something that Dominic did, and he was a very early adapter to, we talked about DTO earlier on. This is essentially the way he saw the future and the journey he took himself on, and is now bringing all of us on in a sense as well, is understanding how you can improve as a player by interacting essentially with the machine in a way that, is just so much more concise, so much more accurate than, anything we could have done when we were essentially asking the best player we knew, what's your opinion on something?
Right.
Not that has no value anymore. There's always a human component to things, but we're very much moving into that paradigm now. I hope that answers your question.
That's an excellent, comprehensive answer to clearly the best question that's been asked thus far. Well played, David, I have to say. Crystal's our next forum contributor here. Thank you very much for submitting a trio of questions here. David, you wear a lot of hats these days. What is the one thing that you do today, play poker, host a podcast, write strategy articles, Unibet ambassador, that you could see yourself doing longer than the others?
Oh, another very good question. Thank you, Crystal, for that. I do wonder about the chip race. I described it as my baby earlier on. I have a great affection for it. It is the kind of material that really gets me excited. And I have to say, it is the thing I care most about probably right now. But Dara and I are always talking about this, is that like we kind of want to go out on top, or we kind of want to like know when it's our time to end that show. That might be in 20 episodes time. It could be in 120 episodes time. I really don't know. But we definitely don't want to reach a point where either we're phoning it in, the content or the format is a bit labored, maybe a bit tired as a structure. and maybe just ceases to be as relevant anymore within the poker media landscape. So we won't do that until we've beaten the dead horse. That's a promise. But at the same time, I'm still really pumped about the next group of interviews I've got lined up for next week and how good those shows are going to be. And then looking into sort of the post 100th episode stuff and, piecing together new series again. So my enthusiasm hasn't waned yet, but we're always conscious of that moment. I suppose playing is the actual answer to your question. I can't imagine a time where I won't both want to play and love the game of poker. It's just a question of whether I love the game of poker enough to play full-time, grinding MTTs, mass multi-tabling online, and then traveling the world when we're allowed to do that again. Right. I will always play poker. I'll always be a poker player. I will always love poker, and I will be, tremendously grateful for what it's given me in life. But whether that's at a professional level, I don't know.
Sure. Well, David, we talked a lot about Unibet Poker and on the online offerings. This is something that, people in Europe, obviously, and, many other parts of the world have been aware of for quite a while. It's been available to them, but that's, exactly why I love this next question by Crystals. Unibet does not have a large footprint on the other side of the pond as other sites. Do you see that changing over the next several years?
Yeah, I do think that will change. We're obviously in Canada, but we're not in South America. We're not in Central America, and we're not in the US. Now, our parent company, Kindred, who own Unibet, have managed to get a license in one or two of the states in America, which I guess is the piecemeal way in which it seems like American poker is coming back. American gambling is coming back in that way too. So I guess if we got a foothold in, let's say, New Jersey, and that was to prove something that we could maybe get one of the licenses for America. I'm speculating now. This is way above my pay grade now, but just go with me here, or kind of don't feel like I'm getting too big for my boots. I know this won't be my decision, but if we manage to do that, a Unibet Open New Jersey wouldn't, at Atlantic City wouldn't be kind of a wild thought. Nice. And I feel as though, we've been arguably the squeakiest clean operator. And that's not to suggest that the industry is filthy dirty or anything like it. But, there are rules and there are ways in which you can interpret laws across all the different countries, regulations across all different, Europe is a total fucking head fuck these days when it comes to all the different countries having their own set of ways you have to do things. So it's a real challenge for operators to both operate effectively, stay inside the laws, interpret some of the regulations, maybe to their benefit or maybe not to their benefit, even though they could potentially interpret them more favorably to themselves, but they're afraid of fines and damaging their brand's reputation. So clarity on that stuff would be great. And I suppose if America just opened back up to poker and started giving out poker licenses again, then I think we'd be in a great spot because we have such a clean reputation. And I imagine that could be a few years into the future where you would see Unibet grow exponentially. We're obviously growing hugely from the point 7 years ago where we joined with the Relax. Actually, we're about to come up to our 7th birthday on that one. We were part of a network. We then went standalone. And now 7 years on, I think we're hundreds of % bigger than we were at the start. And just off the back of a very, very strong 2020. So I could see that happening. I think it's a more middle term goal, but I think we could do that. I would love to see us get into America. Obviously, that's the place every site wants to be, but also get into Mexico, get into Brazil, all that good stuff too.
Well, fingers crossed for continued growth on that front. Crystal's last question here is the next big.
Crystal, you're carrying this forum. Crystal, I'm starting to suspect that nobody actually asked me any questions, and this is Crystal Strazynski came in here and started writing in extra questions just to make me feel more important and less forgotten about.
Well, those who've listened to our previous 27 episodes know that Crystals has been a very frequent and active contributor. Okay, good. So thank you very much for that. The next big accomplishment playing poker you want to achieve is?
Like realistic goals or a sort of a dream. I would love to win a Unibet Open or an Irish Open. They'd be the top of my list. Obviously, well, the World Series main event or a bracelet would be right there at the top two. So there's sort of the three big ones. I guess to win one of those, like a bracelet, a Unibet Open, or an Irish Open would be one of them. I'm not even being greedy. I just want one in the next 10 years, please.
Okay, so David has used his one time. Okay, let's make that happen. And our last forum member contributing a couple questions, Acid Burn FX. Thank you very much. You got a duo of questions here. What is the best and the worst thing, David, that you've ever done for someone, and why?
Jesus, you need to warn me about a question like this. What's the worst thing I've ever done to somebody?
And the best thing.
I don't think either of these questions are answerable on air. One because I was so bad, and one because I was so good. I would hate it to ruin my image as a bad boy.
You're allowed one pass.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna have to pass on this one because I think my only choices here are to seem like a terrible person and to seem braggadocious.
Okay. We'll give you a pass.
As an ambassador, I think you have to learn how to fade questions like this.
There you go.
This is the way careers end.
We'll give David a walk in the big blind. So the final question for you, also from Acid Burn FX, if the genie of the lamp granted you a request with a duration of only 24 hours, what would you ask for?
Well, that's a nice question. Okay, well, I'll go to a personal thing on this one. So for the last several years, my girlfriend Sharon and I have been trying to adopt. Now, that's a complicated enough process here in Malta. You know, there's many steps you go through to do it. And that's something we've been embarking upon for a while now. And we were accepted, so we're on the program. But COVID is, of course, complicating things. So what should be already a sort of a 1.5 to 2 years type of thing is in danger of being even longer.
Wow.
Now, Sharon and I would love to welcome another child into our home tomorrow if we could. So I guess that would be what I would do. I would snap my fingers and, you know, that process would somehow only take a day rather than a couple more years.
That's an absolutely beautiful, very touching and heartwarming answer. And I do hope that that process is as smooth and as short and as easy as possible for you guys. Thanks to everyone who sent in questions for David Lappin. And of course, just a friendly reminder to our Cards Chat community, we'd love to see you submit your questions for our future podcast guests in the dedicated thread on the forums. Please be sure to give us a good review on iTunes and spread the word via your social media channels if you like the show. David, I know I've told you this before. I know it sounds a little bit cliche, but you've certainly kissed that Blarney Stone and you've got the gift of gab. Thank you very much for joining me on the show today. Anything else you'd like to share with our listeners before we let you go?
No, other than it's been lovely to spend some time with you. Dara O'Kearney has, I know, done quite a bit with the Cards Chat community down the years and speaks about them in such high esteem. So I'm glad to have at least got in the mix a little bit here now, introduced myself via this show and maybe will contribute more in the future. And as usual, Robbie, like you're a man who knows his craft. I have a great bugbear in life where when I listen to shows, and look, don't get me wrong, there are a lot of great podcasters out there in the poker space, and this isn't a very last moment parting shot at their expense. But one bugbear I have is people who aren't prepared. It's very obvious when you sit down to listen to a show that people are kind of winging it. And you know, a certain amount of going off on tangents and a certain amount of allowing the conversation to sort of go in its own directions is great, and I welcome that. But it's really obvious when somebody clearly just hasn't sort of done their homework. And I always do my homework, I'll be honest, and I know you are a man who always does yours. So thank you for being so prepared and having such a great bunch of questions for me and a well thought through interview.
It's very kind of you to say. Thank you very much, David. Thanks to all of you for tuning in once again to another episode of the Cards Chat Podcast. I'm Robbie Strazynski. You can follow me on Twitter @CardPlayerLife, and I wish you all a wonderful day.